Tonight we're going to study with you a passage, or a thought at least, that was constantly in the mind of the Apostle Paul. As he looked upon, and he referred to many times, different analogies, different pictures of what the Christian life would be like, and how it was to be lived. And over again in his writings, he referred to the Christian life as a race that is run. And so I want to share with you a little bit about running the race that is set before us. Today, in this time of the year, and I guess this year, there are the Olympic Games that are going on now over in Paris. Some of the things, of course, are disgusting, and some of the things, of course, are enlightening. And it's kind of perhaps maybe I haven't been following it, but there are winners and there are losers and so forth. And I guess the United States has won a lot of medals. But even there, we have seen a great change in these Olympic Games because of the immorality that is in the entire world. And the things that are going on, and how it has affected even the way that people compete against each other. But that's not our sermon tonight. Our sermon is the fact that throughout all the years, as far back as Greek, I guess, mythology or whatever, there have been these contests for people who run in a race. And I suppose the Apostle Paul, living in the area that he was in, that he was very much aware of this activity of racing and the activity of winning and so forth, and even boxing. He talked about boxing one time, but there were several illustrations that he would use. Perhaps one of the most famous that Paul used with reference to this is found in the book of Hebrews, the 12th chapter, verses 1 through 2. That is, if we assume Paul was the writer of this language. Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses. And I'll talk to you a little bit later about this cloud of witnesses, because when I was a young man growing up, I had a different concept of who the witnesses were as to what now I believe they are. And I believe that the crowd of witnesses here were those whom he had mentioned in the 11th chapter, those who were the heroes of faith, such as Abraham and Noah and Moses and Enoch. These are the witnesses of which we are running the race before. All right? So he said here, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which does so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us. Looking unto Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. When the Apostle Paul came to the end of his life in 2 Timothy, the 4th chapter, he here, of course, is appealing to Timothy to come unto him shortly, and he is concluding that he is about to the end of his life here upon this earth. He says, I am now ready to be offered, in verse 6 of 2 Timothy 4. I am now ready to be offered, and the time of my departure is at hand. And it is interesting what he now says in the next few verses. I have fought a good fight. So the life of Christianity is a fight that is fought. And he felt like he had done a good job at that. He says here, continuing on, he says, I have finished my course. And this, of course, with allusion to what we're talking about here tonight, and what he encourages us to do, to run with patience the race that is set before us. He says, I've finished that course. He was crossing the finish line. And he said, I have kept the faith. Henceforth, there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, shall give me at that day, and not to me only, but unto all those that love his appearing. To the Corinthian brethren, he would write this in 1 Corinthians, the 9th chapter. He says, know ye not that they which run in a race run all, but one receiveth the prize, so run that ye may obtain. I don't think this means that in the congregation at Davila, you're all running the race, but only one of you are going to get the prize. I don't think that's implied here at all. But but he's using the analogy that if you run in a race, there are winners, and of course there are losers. And every man that striveth for the mastery is temperate in all things. Now they do it to obtain a corruptible crown, but we an incorruptible. Those who are running those races over there in Paris and maybe winning medals, they get a gold medal, a silver medal, and a bronze medal, whatever. They're going to get this medal, but what good is that? And it fades away. You might lose it. Some thief might come and steal it. But the prize that we're going to gain in the winning of this race is an incorruptible prize. Something that nobody will ever take from you. Something that you will enjoy for an eternity. I therefore so run, not with uncertainty, so fight I, as one that not beateth the air, as one that beateth the air. But I keep under my body, and bring it into subjection, lest that by any means, when I have preached to others, I myself should be a castaway. So these are just a few of the passages of Scripture that the Apostle Paul used with reference to the fact that he was running a race, and he encourages us to do so likewise. Several years ago, and this seems kind of unusual to me that it didn't happen prior to this, but in 1954, a record was broken in the racing field. In 1954, in May the 6th, Roger Bannister became the first man in history to run a mile in less than 4 minutes. Now it has of course been beat many, many times since then. And I would think that someone else besides an American would win this, or would be able to beat the record. You know, you take the people over there in India or Africa and so forth, and they run to catch their prey and so forth. I would think that they would be faster than Roger Bannister. But he broke the record in 1954 to run a mile in less. It wasn't much less, but it just had to be less by seconds, or even the millimeters of seconds, to be able to have the winning score, to be able to say that he was the first man in history to do this. Well, within 2 months, and this is something, you know, that once you do something, there's always somebody that wants to try to outdo you. So in 2 months' time, there was another man by the name of John Landy who broke the record by 1.4 seconds. Again, that's not very much, but it was enough to say that he is the champion, and he is the winner, and he is the one that now holds the record. So on August the 7th, 1954, they set up a race between these two men, between Roger Bannister and this man called John Landy. And so they met for this historic race. As they moved to the last lap, Landy held the lead. He was faster than Mr. Bannister was, because he just proved this, having broken the record. But as he was going around towards this last lap, he began to wonder, where is Bannister? He began to wonder, is he behind me? How far behind me is he? And so what he did is he told New York Times personnel who was going to put this in the New York Times, he said he just turned his head for a minute to see if Bannister was beside him. And Bannister passed him up. He lost his stride. He had a stride going. He was going to win that race, but he lost his stride back to Bannister, and Bannister once again is the champion. This reminds me of a story that the Apostle Paul told one time to the Philippian brethren in Philippians 3:12 and 13. Not as though I had already attained, either were already perfect, but I follow after, if that I have apprehended that for which I am also apprehended of Christ Jesus. And then he says this, brethren, I count myself to have apprehended. But this one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind me, reaching forth unto the things which are before. I press towards the mark of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus. You see, my friends and my brothers and sisters, when you're running the race, you don't have time to look back. You just got to keep your eyes on the goal. You got to keep your eyes on the prize. If you look back, again, that's probably one of the tricks of Satan that we talked about the other night. One of the agencies that he uses to get you to think about the past, to look back into the past. But you always got to keep your eyes on the future. And that's what Paul said. He said, I don't look back. He wasn't worried about where the competitors were. He just knew where he wanted to be and where he wanted to go. And so we're going to talk a little bit about this race that he mentioned to us in the book of Hebrews. There are several things that are necessary for a race. I think one of the things that's necessary for a race is a crowd. You might think, well, you don't need to have a crowd to have a race. What benefit is there for a race? If nobody recognizes it, if nobody sees it, what would be the benefit of beating your competitor? It would be your word against his word, wouldn't it? So crowd is a very essential element in any race. We also know that a coach is very necessary in a race. Now, I'm talking about in the professional field, they have their coaches that tell, of course, the individual who's running how to do it, what to do, and how to develop yourself and to maintain a healthy situation or a healthy life to be able to do this. So a coach is very important in a race. We also know that the cost is very important. There's a lot of sacrifice. I mean, you don't get to eat cookies. You don't get to eat the cookies that our dear good sisters bake for us. You don't get to do that and be able to run well because it just puts weight on. So there are things that you have to limit yourself on. You have to sacrifice in order to be able to be fit for this race. There may be, of course, costs involved as far as enlistments. In some races, I suppose you'd have to put down a certain amount of money to be able to enlist in this. So there is a cost involved. And then there is cooperation. In any race, there has to be cooperation. There has to be a law of some sort. In other words, here you have an oval track, and suppose somebody decides he's just going to cross through the middle. Well, you can't do that. You have to cooperate. If there's a track, everybody runs the same track. Everybody goes the same pattern. Everybody does the same thing. There has to be cooperation amongst the participants in this particular athletic activity. There has to be an equality there. And then last of all, or not last of all rather, but next to last, there is a course that has to be pursued. There's a course that is defined. Whether it is a 26-mile marathon, or whether it's an oval track that you go around and it's a mile long or half mile or whatever it is, but there is a course that is definitely chosen for this race. And then last of all, there is the crown. There's the prize. That's what we're striving for. What benefit would there be to put you through all of this sacrifice and expend all this money and go through all this training if you weren't doing it for some kind of a prize? So these are the elements that are composed and are necessary for a race that is run. We're going to look at each one of them individually tonight. First of all, there is the crowd. And the race that the Apostle Paul was talking about was found there in the book of Hebrews, the 12th chapter. There was a crowd, for he says that we are running this race before many witnesses. So great a cloud of witnesses in Hebrews 12, verse 2. These witnesses are, I mentioned a little bit ago that I used to have a concept of what that meant. This was before I actually got into studying the issue. But I always thought when he said, we are encompassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, I thought, well, that's my friends, and that's my neighbors, and that's my family. In other words, that's the present witnesses that we have, that we live and that we race before. But I come to the realization that wasn't what he was referring to, but that he was referring to the past witnesses, such as is recorded in Hebrews, the 11th chapter. But I don't know that either one of them, of course, I think we could probably look at both of them and say we'd be safe in saying these are witnesses. Because aren't the people that we live around every day our witnesses? I mean, the people we work with, the people we go to school with, the people that we, our neighbors around about us. And I'll tell you what, here in Kentucky, your neighbors are real close. One of the things I've noticed, I get a little claustrophobic. The houses are just bang, bang right up to each other all the way up through this hall and all the way back down that hall. And so you are a witness to those people. They will see you, and they see you every day doing whatever it is that you do. And I'll guarantee you, if you are a person that goes to church, they know you go to church. They see you go to church. They know there's a certain time that you do that. So we are, in a sense, running our race before these witnesses of the present time. But I believe that there is, of course, a secondary application. The present are there to encourage us. When you have a race, you run that race, and if you ever looked at a foot race that is run, there will be, bystanders all along that route. There will be people that are handing you a bottle of water so that you can keep running. There are people, your family, your friends, the people that are behind you are there shouting and screaming, just to go on, telling you, your best contestant is 4 feet behind you. They're just there and they're helping you. So we are encompassed about with these witnesses, and they are the helpers. They are the encouragers. And I think we need that, don't we? I think encouragement is a necessary quality of living the Christian life. I don't know about you, but I can't make it alone. I just can't make it alone. I need you, and I hope that you understand that. And I hope you need me. We need each other. Sometimes in the church we get to thinking, I can live all by myself, I can do it myself, and I don't need your help. It doesn't work that way. You know why it doesn't? Because of Ecclesiastes, the 4th chapter, verses 9 through 10. He said, 2 are better than 1. 2 are better than 1. Because, he says, that they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, the one will lift up his fellow, but woe to him that is alone when he falleth, for he hath not another to help him up. So we need those who are encouraging us as we run this race to lift us up when we fall. And I thank you, brethren, if you have been a part of that relationship with me, that you've helped me get back up again. And I hope that we all work together that way, because that's a very necessary thing in running the Christian race, of encouraging and backing one another. All right. But that probably it is not the complete, but I'm going to continue on in this idea of encouragement, because it's a theme throughout the Bible. In Romans 14:19, it says, let us therefore follow after the things which make for peace, and things wherewith we may edify another. Hebrews 3:13, but exhort one another daily while it is called today, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. Let us exhort one another, encourage one another. That word exhort is used again a little bit later in Hebrews 10. And let us consider one another to provoke. I always thought the word provoke was was a negative thing. Provoke evil, provoke a person to do wrong or whatever. But he's using it here in a positive way, to provoke one another to love and to good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another. I looked up that word exhorting one time, and here's what I found it to mean, as it is used here in this passage. And I bring it down to a present day situation. Have you ever been to a t-ball game? Or a soccer? I know, Jeremy, you've been to a soccer game. You probably realize this probably better than any of us, being a coach, I think, over soccer. But, if you've been to a soccer game with young children, the parents, they are outrageous. I mean, them poor kids, mom and dad, grandma and grandpa, they're on the sidelines. And they're yelling at poor little Charlie down there, I would say Johnny, because I know we got a lot of Johnnies here. They're laughing and they're hollering at Charlie down there. Charlie, kick that ball, and straighten up and stand up and be watchful and so forth. The parents get more excited than the children do in these games of their children. That's what the word exhort means. It refers to that parent out there that's hollering and just filled with excitement and just encouraging their children to play that game. If we could do that in the church, wouldn't that be wonderful? When exhorting one another as you see the day approaching, that we would just be so excited and encourage one another to get out and go to church and get out and do whatever it is that we can do in a spiritual manner. This is the encouragement that comes from the present day crowd that we have. Indeed, we are encompassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses. But let's take this a step further this evening. The past are also there to let us know that you can run the race. And I think this is probably the real meaning behind the words in Hebrews 12. After talking about all those great individuals, he said, wherefore we are encompassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses. People who will stand and who will witness against us if we don't make it. I don't care what excuse you lay out there. I don't care what problem you think of that you think is keeping you from running the Christian race or winning the Christian race. I don't care what it is. There is somebody that's already beat you at that. There's somebody that's already won and has overcome that obstacle you think is keeping you from running the race. God's commandments are too hard, people might say. Oh, I can't do that. That's just too hard, Lord. You're asking me to do something that would be impossible. You know who's going to be there in the judgment day and going to witness against you? Abraham. You think you've been asked to do anything harder than he was asked? To take a knife and take your own son's life? Abraham was willing to do that. He was stopped, of course, and God realized that Abraham was righteous at that particular point. He stopped him and provided another sacrifice, but you can't use the excuse, it's too hard to live the Christian life. You cannot use the excuse that you're asking me too much, Lord. Build an ark? I don't even know what it looks like. Just imagine how much timber it would take and how much labor is going to be involved. And it took, 100 and some years to build this thing? Well, Lord, you're just asking too much of me. Old Noah's going to be there to judge us in that day. He's going to be there as a witness against us, that it doesn't make any difference what he asks of you. It can be done if you want to win the prize. And so these are the witnesses that he's talking about. Sarah, 90 years old. Why people say, well, that's impossible? You're asking me to do the impossible. Sarah was 90 years old when she gave birth to a baby. You think that was impossible? In our mind it is, but with God all things are possible. So you're not going to be able to use that excuse. What about Moses? Well, we say sometimes, well, I just couldn't walk away from this job. I just couldn't walk away from this offer. I couldn't walk away from this situation. I was going to be, he was going to help me in later life. And when I finally get my financial status built up, I'm going to come back to church and I'm going to do what's right and I'm going to live right. Moses, have you ever imagined what he had at his disposal? You ever imagine what he had being a son of Pharaoh's daughter? All the wealth, and he probably could have had half the kingdom and all of that. Just imagine that. And he walked away from that. Why? Because he chose rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. So Moses will be there to witness against us if you think that you have too much to walk away from in order to run the race. What about Job? He's not mentioned there in this account in Hebrews the 11th chapter, but there are people who allow their friends and allow their family to draw them away. And, and here was Job. He lost all of them, and it still did not draw him away. He remained faithful, and he retained his integrity as his wife asked him to give it up. What about other religions? Lord, you just don't understand how appealing other religions are. You don't understand how that, they have concerts and they have musical instruments and they play bands and it's exciting to go to all of these religious festivals. Well, old King Nebuchadnezzar, he had a band. He had people blowing trumpets and horns and all of that. And then he wanted the people to bow down to the golden image. But Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego will be a witness against you if you fall for stuff like that. They're going to say, we didn't fall for it. We stood firm in what we believed. And we stood firm with our God. And it didn't make any difference if he took our life, which he attempted to do by throwing them into the fiery furnace. It didn't make any difference. They were going to stand firm. So if you give in to a religion because it's more exciting, because it just seems to be more physically in tune, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego will be there to meet you at the pearly gates. They're going to be there to meet you because they're going to say, we did it. We walked away from that which was appealing to the flesh. Some people say, well, I'm not allowed to do that. During COVID, this is a hang-up of mine, brothers and sisters. During COVID, people said, we can't go to church. You know what? Daniel is going to be there to tell you, you got to go to church. He's going to stand there and tell you, you got to pray. And don't stop praying. And don't stop doing. No, even if the government tells you you can't, we're going to have to stand up at some point and say, we're going to do this. It's not inconceivable that the government someday will step in and say, all right, you can't worship with one cup. There will be a time coming, I can guarantee you that. It already happened over in South Charleston one time when they had an epidemic. Remember, I don't know if you remember, Elaine, and they tried to shut down all the churches there up and down that Kanawha River Valley and not allow them to have communion or even to worship. And so it can happen again, over and over and over, and it will. But here is a man, Daniel, who will stand up and say, do what is right. Do what is right. There's the Ethiopian eunuch. Some people say, oh, church is too far. You go on vacation, oh, I can't drive an hour to church. I'll just miss church today. Or I can't go to church. You know, my job is over here in Lexington. I can't drive back to Inez, Kentucky all the time and every weekend. Well, you just ask the eunuch when you get there. When you get to the pearly gates, you ask the eunuch how far he went to serve his God. As he went down into Egypt in a chariot, I don't imagine he had these fancy roads that we have today. I imagine it was a pretty rough ride down there. They said it's about 1,000 miles. I don't know. But you know, the old Ethiopian eunuch, he's going to say, you can go. If you put your mind to it and you really want to serve the Lord, you can do it. What about the Apostle Paul? I noticed as I was reading over Jeremy, the next chapter here, you know, in Acts, the 14th chapter, I was noticing that Paul was stoned, and I think to death. He was stoned and left for dead, it says. And so he was faced with all kinds of things. In 2 Corinthians, the 11th chapter, he talks about perils in the city and perils in the country and so forth. And so you say, well, I've been tortured too much, or I've been persecuted too much for my stand, and my family's turned against me, and everything's just going wrong, so I can't do it. I tell you, Paul will be there to meet you at the judgment day. He's going to be a witness to you, against you, because he was able to endure all of that persecution. Let me show you how that the witnesses will work. In the book of Matthew, the 12th chapter, verses 41 through 42, this is what Jesus said. He said, the men of Nineveh, now listen to this carefully, the men of Nineveh will rise in judgment with this generation and shall condemn it. They are witnesses. The men of Nineveh were. And they weren't even Israelites. They weren't even the children of Israel and of the direct descendants of Abraham. But the men of Nineveh are going to be there as judges. Oh, you say, no, it can't be, because Jesus is going to be the judge. Yes, he'll be the judge. But these are individuals, just like those in the book of Hebrews 11, that will be a witness against us and condemn us. Why? Because of their actions. It will not be a judgment that you know of sending here or sending there, but by their actions they're going to condemn us, because they repented at the preaching of Jonas, and behold, a greater than Jonas is here. Then he goes on to another example. He says, and the queen of the south shall rise up in the judgment with this generation and shall condemn it. Well, who is she, the queen of the south, that she has the right to condemn anybody? But she's going to condemn them because of their actions. And she proved that it was important, as she even came to a man like Solomon. She came from the uttermost parts of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon. Behold, a greater than Solomon is here. They wouldn't listen to the words of Jesus. And so this queen of the south is going to condemn a lot of people in that generation. This is how they are witnesses. Wherefore, we are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses. Let's look at the coach for just a little bit. While running the race, we must listen to and keep our eyes fixed on the coach. Now, the coach will do everything, or should do everything, that he wants you to do. He's not just going to sit back on the sidelines, but he's going to do everything he wants you to do. And that's what Jesus does. He's already run the race. He's already won the victory. He's already won that seat with his Father in heaven. In Hebrews 2:10, he says, for it becometh him, for whom are all things, and by whom are all things, in bringing many sons unto glory, to make the captain of their salvation perfect through sufferings. The captain of their salvation. And that's who Jesus is. He is the coach. He is the captain. He is our example. 1 Peter, the 2nd chapter, Peter says that we are to walk in his steps and follow in the footsteps of Jesus. And so he has set the example for us. He is also our guide. Paul said in 1 Corinthians 11:1, be ye followers of me, even as I also am of Christ. And so though we may have those witnesses before us, such as Paul and Peter and James and John, who proved that you could live faithfully and that you could win a prize, we also know that they were only following Christ to be able to obtain that. And then His Word will judge us. If we receive not His Word, we reject His Word. He wants us to know here in John the 12th chapter that it is that Word that shall judge us in the last day. And so we certainly want to listen to this great coach. He is the only way to win the race. When he says that in John the 14th chapter there, when he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no man cometh unto the Father but by me. You know what the secret to winning the race really is? With reference to the coach. You know, the coach has so much wisdom and so much guidance, and again, he will tell you how you do things and how you prepare yourself, and maybe make whatever sacrifices, stop eating certain kinds of foods. You know, that's in a physical race. I'm glad that's not in a spiritual race. but he will tell you all of that. But here's the secret. I'm going to share with you something pretty important right here. Here's the secret of winning the race. Rub butterfly dust on your heart. That's a secret. Years ago, there was an old Indian chief. And the young Indian boys in this little grouping, you know, they had to go out and they had to learn how to run, because that was the only way they could capture their prey. That was the only way they could fight their battles. They had to learn to run. So they came to the chief one day and they said, Chief, teach us how to run. Just as we would with Jesus. Lord, teach us how to run. So the old chief, he said, you've got to rub butterfly dust on your heart. And so all day long, you would see these little boys running around the camp, out in the fields, trying to catch, I remember I said trying to catch butterflies, so that they could take that dust off the butterfly wing and rub it on their heart. Well, you and I know it wasn't the butterfly dust that was doing anything. It was the practicing. It was the continual running that chief wanted them to do. And so that's what Jesus would have us to do. There's no real potent, there's no real lotion, no real powder that will help you to be a Christian, but practice will. Continual practice. Don't give up. In serving the Lord, I think going to church is one of that practices. Going to church, serving Him, worshiping Him. So don't give up on that. Continue steadfastly in that. Or reading your Bible, continue steadfastly in that. Praying to your God, continue steadfastly in that. And as you do, the more you do it, the more efficient you become, and the more able you will be able to win the prize at the end of time. All right, the cost. There is a cost involved. He said, lay aside every weight and the sin which does so easily beset you. Now, this is a difficult thing to do here sometimes, because we are physical, we are human, and to lay aside these things in order to win the prize is sometimes a difficult thing to do. Lay aside simply means to take off, it means to strip off or to remove. The running the race will cost you something. I'm reminded of a story that's found in 2 Samuel, the 24th chapter. This is with reference to King David. And David had done something. What was it? I believe he tried to number the children of Israel or something. There was a kind of a appointment that he was trying to get to, or whatever, as far as being able to number all the people. And it grieved God, and so there was a tragedy brought upon the nation of Israel. And so David realized that he was the one that was in fault. So he came and he asked God what he needed to do, and there were several choices, but one of them was he was to offer a sacrifice. But here he is out in the middle of nowhere, and he has nothing to sacrifice. He has no animals or whatever. So he comes to King Araunah, and he says, to King Araunah, he says, I want to buy your animals, your cattle or oxen. I want to buy your threshing floor and to use as lumber, to build an altar, to build a fire and so forth. And I want to buy this because I need to make a sacrifice to God. Well, it says, and the king said to Araunah, nay, but I will surely buy thee at a price. And the reason he made that statement was because Araunah said he felt an obligation. He felt, because he respected David, he said, you don't have to pay anything for this. He said, I'll just give it to you. And he offered it to David free of charge. I don't want any money. He offered to him free of charge. And David made this statement right here. I will surely buy thee at a price. Neither will I offer burnt offerings unto the Lord my God of that which doth cost me nothing. What benefit is there in sacrificing to God if it doesn't cost you anything? That's not a sacrifice. If it doesn't cause you to have to do something or sacrifice something, there's no benefit in a sacrifice, because a sacrifice is exactly that. You're giving up something, doing something. And so David said, I'm not going to do this. He said, I'm going to pay you for this because I don't want to be one that would offer a sacrifice to God that doesn't cost me something. All right, the cost is what he said there, giving up the weights and the sins which so easily beset us. Now, the weights refer to things that may be legitimate within themselves. In other words, you couldn't go to the scriptures and say, okay, this is sinful and you got to give it up. There are some things that are like that you just have to realize that they're pulling you down. A weight is something that pulls you down. That's what a weight is. And so it's not necessarily wrong, but it's not lifting you up. It's not helping you to run the race. It's holding you back. And so it may be something that you have to give up. You know, it could be entertainment, it could be recreation, it could be possessions that you have, it could be music, it could be TV. You know, years ago, the preachers used to preach against TV. Well, I realized what they were doing, and I've got a TV, I'm not teaching against TV. But what I'm saying is, it can be a weight. You know, if we spend all of our time in front of the TV, it's a weight that keeps us from picking up our Bibles and reading it, or going out and visiting and having fellowship with brothers and sisters. So anything that does not build us up, but rather pulls us down, is a weight. I used, in another sermon I used an example that comes from the South Charleston congregation, an example that happened years and years and years ago before you young girls. This is something you would remember, but I'm sure Elaine does. But I was holding a meeting in South Charleston, and at the church there, Stop 12, was holding a meeting. And there was this was back during the days of the CB craze. You remember that? Everybody had a CB. I was preacher man. I don't know what you were there, but I was preacher man. And everybody had a handle, and you had the CBs, and everybody had one in their cars, and you had the homes, stationed at home and all that. And it was kind of a neat time. I mean, it got bad, it got vulgar after a while, and you just kind of had to walk away from it. But when it was in its good prime, it was a good thing. And what they had all over the country, my mom and dad was a part of one, they would have what they called CB clubs. Now, these CB clubs, you would get together, on a certain night, and you would do things to raise money for the community. And, if you were traveling down the interstate, they would set up coffee shops in the rest areas. That was done by the CB clubs. Or, they would do things for whatever other, good organization. They would raise money for that. It was a good thing. And here's where you can take a good thing and make it bad. So, they'd have these CB clubs. It just so happened that they had a meeting at the CB club when I was having a meeting at Stop 12 Church of Christ. And a couple of the members of this CB club, where do you think they went? They went to the CB club meeting and never came to church. Now you see, that's a weight. There's nothing wrong with it. Not a thing wrong with it. And you couldn't go to the Bible and condemn it for nothing. But when it allows you to pull you down spiritually, and it did. It finally caused those people just to, I don't know if that thing alone did, but it caused those people just to leave the church entirely. One little thing leads to another little thing, and you get to where you don't go to church at all. That's the way it works. And so you cannot let these weights pull you down. And that's why Paul says, get rid of them. The rich young ruler, he had a weight. It was his money. You remember him as the one that he said, what can I do that I may gain eternal life? Jesus gave him some of the commandments, but he still lacked something. And what it was, Jesus told him, go sell all that he had and give to the poor and come and follow me. And he went away sorrowful. He had a weight that was pulling him down. It was that one particular thing that he didn't want to give up. He says, lay aside all the weights and the sins which does so easily beset us. Notice that these sins are those things which easily beset us. There's a meaning in that word, beset us, because what he's talking about are the sins which are so close to us that we can't even see them ourselves. That's the sins he's talking about. He's not talking about, like big things like fornication, adultery. He's not talking about murder and stealing and all that. We all know that's wrong. But he's talking about things that are clinging to us, things that beset us. And the idea still is in connection with the race that was run, because what they would do, back in that day, they wore robes. They didn't wear a pair of pants. They wore robes. And in order for them to run, they had to take the bottom of that robe and bring it up, and they would tie it in a knot so that they could be free, and there would be nothing that would beset them. And so Paul was still using the imagery here. Lay aside the sins which have so easily beset you. Get them out of the way and remove them from you. Things that entangle us, things that would distract us. It's the picture of clothing flapping around the runner. These are sins that are so common that even we do not realize we have them. You know what they are? Sometimes they're sins of disposition, such as things like hatred, animosity, jealousy, envy, things like that. We don't think we have them. But when they come up and pop their ugly head, they harm us in running the Christian life. So these sins of disposition or secret sins that you might have, you've got to get rid of them in order to run this race. He says, put off concerning the former conversation the old man that is corrupt according to the deceitful lusts. Peter said, dearly beloved, I beseech you as strangers and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts which war against the soul. And then in the book of Colossians 3, it was a great, many verses there that had to do with mortifying the deeds of the body, mortifying the things that we do in order that we might be able to put on the new man. The course. There is a course. The path we travel makes all the difference in our destination. There are two different courses that we travel. Matthew, the 7th chapter, verses 13 through 14, talks about those two courses. We've used this passage of Scripture several times. He says, enter ye in at the strait gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leadeth to destruction, and many there be which go in thereat. Because strait is the gate and narrow is the way which leadeth unto life, and few there be that find it. So there are two courses that we can go. We can go the easy route, or we can go the straight and the narrow way, and that leads, of course, to eternal life. Last of all, the crown. The reward of winning the race is that of an incorruptible crown, not a corruptible one. I've been in several contests. One time I was in a contest in our high school. I took a mechanics class. I took a mechanics school. And my dad had a mechanics garage, so I had a heads up on everybody else there. There was another fellow in there, Ed Masters. His dad owned the Chrysler dealership in town, so me and him, we had heads up on everybody. Everybody else didn't know what they were doing. We did. We thought anyway. So we had a contest in the state of Pennsylvania. It was a Plymouth Duster with that slant 6 engine in it. And we got down there and they had a whole field full of them, and they had all the same problems. You didn't know what the problem was. So you had to go out, and whoever could get it running in the most efficient time. In other words, first of all, you'd be the winner. We had the whole state of Pennsylvania there. We opened the hood, and there was the carburetor in a box in pieces. There was the distributor all tore apart in pieces in a box. And so Ed, he took the carburetor, I took the distributor, and we went to put it all back again and put it in. We came in third. It wasn't too bad to come in third. We kind of enjoyed that glory, out of the whole state of Pennsylvania anyway. And so, and I got a nice little trophy. Had a car, on it, gold car, and a brown base, brown wooden base. I don't even know where that thing's at anymore. Because it's a corruptible crown. It's a corruptible prize. People get prizes, money prizes, for writing essays and things like that. You still got the money? No. What about a blue ribbon that you got at the fair for something that you made? You still got the blue ribbon? I doubt it. You see, these are corruptible crowns. What we're after tonight is that which is incorruptible. That which it will always be kept, will always be the same, and that we'll always have it and never lose it as long as we remain faithful. In 1 Corinthians 9:25, and every man that striveth for the mastery is temperate in all things. So you've got to be temperate, and it's a mastery. Now they do it to obtain a corruptible crown, but we an incorruptible. So let us press towards the goal, as is stated in Philippians 3:14. I press towards the mark of the prize of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus. And I've already read to you from 1 Corinthians 9 there, of the statement which he says, so run that ye may obtain. You can't imagine how glorious that crown will be. And that there will be this lineup in heaven who are the great cloud of witnesses that might just say to us, I know you could do it. I know you can do it. You see, this is the race Paul wants us to run, that we might be able to reign and be able to receive that home in heaven. I hope that you are running that race. If you're not running that race, if you haven't entered, there's a place of entrance. And that place of entrance is through obedience to the gospel, being baptized for the remission of our sins. And that starts the journey. And I know that when you start that journey, you're going to fall, you're going to stumble. That's why we're here to help you, pick you back up again. And but as you get stronger, you'll be running, and finally someday be able to say with the Apostle Paul, I know there is a crown of righteousness laid up in heaven for me, and not for me only, but for all those who love his appearing, because I have finished my course. If you're here tonight, won't you come while we stand and while we sing this